Hello, I'm Ray Suarez. We're going to look at two constants in the history of America, immigration and the reaction to it. As you'll see, Americans have always debated whether or not the time has come to close the golden door. And as always, the debate is not just about jobs and wages and taxes, not just about the material quality of American life, but about the spirit of America as well. Across the centuries, the position we've taken on immigration has been the way every generation gets to play a part in defining not just who we are, but what we will become. Pushed by fear or pulled by hope, it's the very instinct for survival that makes living things move about in search of a better land. And that same instinct, perhaps, moves them, once they've found land, to demarcate and defend it. Historians tell us that the first immigrants to America came across the Bering Straits on foot from Asia some 15,000 years ago. Native Americans say that this version of history is whitewashed, that they are indigenous people who've been here since the creation. And that may well be when the immigration debate began.
We don't feel we migrated from any place. We were the first Americans. Everybody else are guests here, really.
Conflict between natives and newcomers to any land is inevitable, and conflict has been a constant part of the American experience. For the persistence of immigration has compelled us as a nation to repeatedly confront unsettled questions about who and what we are.
This is my country, land of my choice. This is my country.
A democracy is only as good as all of its citizens make it. Thomas Jefferson, in his first inaugural in 1807, said a very profound thing. "We are here engaged," said Thomas Jefferson, "in the most important experiment in the history of the human race to determine whether or not human beings are wise enough to govern themselves."
Each generation of Americans has had to grapple with the immigration issue, to try to redefine America in the light its own times cast against the backdrop of an immigration saga which is, ultimately, nothing less than the moving human history of hopes and fears.
Who is really America? We are not a part of America. America is part of us.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
Being a part of America. Some get it without effort, as their right by birth. Others have to work for it, as a rite of passage. But however it comes, being a citizen is the one thing that gives us all the right to call ourselves Americans. 1,000 new citizens took their oath of allegiance at this special ceremony last fall from senior federal judge Abraham Lincoln Marovitz of the Northern District of Illinois, an 89-year-old judge who takes pride in having naturalized more than 50,000 new Americans in his years on the federal bench.
And so when I look around this room and see people from all over the world coming here, I'm always hoping that you'll learn what I learned from my illiterate parents who never had a day's schooling in their lives. The importance of being decent to decent people.
Three decent but very different families are moving to embrace citizenship this day. Hai Peng, who came here as a legal immigrant to join her husband. Primo and Maria Romelia Miramontes, who took advantage of the amnesty offer in 1986 to become legal residents, and Andre and Elizabeth Boris and their daughter Kathy, who came here as political refugees from Poland. 3 different families finding new common ground.
You can go to Germany and live in Germany and become a citizen of Germany, but you'll never be a German. You can go to France and become a citizen, but you'll never be a Frenchman. But no matter who you are or where you came from, if you come to America and you become a citizen, you are an American. And that rather underscores the uniqueness and the beauty of this country and what it has to offer.
Through the ages, many nations have laid claim to America. Although the Norse Viking Leif Erikson discovered the coast of New England in 1000 AD, it was Christopher Columbus who first claimed the New World for Spain in 1492. John Cabot planted the flag of England on the east coast of North America in 1497, and in 1539, Hernando de Soto visited the west coast of Florida and claimed it for Spain. In 1607, the English founded Virginia. Depicted as an earthly paradise, the New World pulled almost 400,000 English men and women across the ocean in the 1600s. In 1619, a Dutch ship traded 20 slaves at the English settlement in Jamestown for provisions. As slavery had not yet been developed, they were treated like many other poor white immigrants as indentured servants. They worked a set period and were then released and given land to settle on. As the English settled the eastern seaboard, the French moved west through Canada and the Great Lakes, and then south along the rivers. In 1673, Father Pierre Marquette and Louis Joliet explored the Wisconsin, Mississippi, and Illinois rivers. And 9 years later, Robert de La Salle claimed the entire Mississippi River Valley for the King of France. But most of the early colonists were English. The arrival of German-speaking immigrants in the 1700s provoked the nation's first fears and its first debate about foreigners.
That's where the derogatory term, you live in a burg, it was an English way of referring to the German settlers as hicks, as backwash people.
There's a wonderful letter that Benjamin Franklin wrote in the 1750s complaining about the new German immigrants in Pennsylvania.
But what happened is during the Revolutionary War, those Germans fought on the side of the colonists against the British. So then Franklin had to rethink it. But what Franklin was doing was defining America in Anglo-centric terms. And the beginning of the conflict, on the one hand, he is welcoming in the Constitution, which he and others helped put together, there is a sense that this is an evolving nation, that citizenship, the critical element. On the other hand, he's railing against those who maintain their cultural traditions and organize life a little bit differently.
And this ambivalence that he expressed in 1750 has been a continuous theme in American history.
In 1763, the end of the French and Indian War spurred a rush of migration to the now secure colonial frontiers. And by 1790, the American population had grown to 4 million people.
By and large, Americans did not think a great deal about immigration in the early part of our history. George Washington set the mood and the policy when he said we will welcome not just the well-to-do and the skilled, but we will welcome the poor and the oppressed to our shores, and we will provide asylum for them.
Reacting to the radicalism of the French Revolution, Congress passed its first anti-immigration legislation in 1798. The Alien and Sedition Acts enabled the president to expel any foreigners deemed dangerous. Thomas Jefferson opposed the legislation and let the act die when he won election in 1800. The pull of gold discovered at Sutter's Mill in California in 1849 and the push of 3 years of potato famine in Ireland and failed democratic revolutions in Europe brought a flood of immigrants in the mid-19th century and a new vision of America as the land of golden opportunity.
Different immigrant groups actually had different ways of talking about the United States, but they frequently talked of it in terms of gold, and there were all these stories about the United States being a place where the streets were paved with gold and other things.
Before I heard about that, come American, everybody got rich. Yeah, everybody got rich.
That same golden vision pulled young Peng to America from mainland China in 1985. He got a job in a Chinese restaurant as a busboy, studied English, saved his money, and 2 years ago opened his own restaurant, Fortune Express, on Milwaukee Avenue.
The Fortune Express means we want to get some fortune.
Young Peng became a citizen and 4 years ago returned to China, married Hai, the girl next door, and brought her back to America, where they had 2 children, Jessica and Jeffrey.
Yeah, 2 kids is American citizen. They was born here. I'm American citizen. Now she be American citizen here, and we all family all is American citizen. And the most important, we have a right to vote.
Who makes the laws in the United States?
Who makes the law? It's Congress.
Which president was the first president of the United States?
It's George Washington.
We are all Americans, and we ought to look for those things that we share as zealously as we look for those things that are unique to our particular ethnic or religious heritage.
A noble ideal, but difficult to achieve.
There always has been a clash between our instinct to be generous, to reach out, to welcome people, and our failure to be comfortable with them once they get here.
The history of Chinese immigration to America offers an excellent case in point. Chinese immigrants joined fortune hunters from around the world in the California gold rush of 1849. By 1850, 25,000 Chinese were prospecting for gold in California's mountains. Like most immigrants speaking a foreign tongue, they tended to band together. Cooperative mining efforts between whites and Chinese were rare. Anti-Chinese sentiment grew. A still greater wave of Chinese immigration came with the recruiting in China of laborers to help build the western leg of the nation's first transcontinental railroad. Some protested that the Chinese were too weak to endure the hardship of constructing a railroad over the high Sierras. Others argued any race that could build the Great Wall of China could build a railroad. Although almost all the Central Pacific track had been laid by Chinese laborers using picks, shovels, and hand-pulled carts, prejudice against Chinese prevented any of them from appearing in this photo celebrating the meeting of the 2 lines. One enterprise Chinese immigrants were permitted to pursue was the laundry business, but anti-Chinese sentiment continued to grow through the 1870s. The ugly mood toward Chinese immigrants exploded in rioting in Western towns in the early 1880s. This picture captured the destruction of the Chinese section of Denver, all of which culminated in 1882 with Congress passing the Federal Chinese Exclusion Act, the first national legislation excluding immigrants on the basis of race.
There was a perception that white Americans didn't want these Asians infesting, and that was the word they used, American life. And so this act was passed for that purpose, explicitly, to keep Chinese labor out.
The 1850s also saw increasing opposition to Irish and German immigrants. An anti-foreigner crusade called the Know Nothing movement, which accused the Irish and Germans of stealing elections in the nation's big cities, pushed to restrict the admission and naturalization of foreigners. When asked in 1855 if he was in favor of the Know Nothing movement, Abraham Lincoln said, "How can anyone who abhors the oppression of Negroes be in favor of degrading classes of white people? Our progress in degeneracy appears to me to be pretty rapid. As a nation, we began by declaring that all men are created equal. We now practically read it, all men are created equal except Negroes. When the Know-Nothings get control, it will read, all men are created equal except Negroes and foreigners and Catholics. When it comes to this, I should prefer emigrating to some country where they make no pretense of loving liberty, to Russia, for instance, where despotism can be taken pure and without the base alloy of hypocrisy.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above.
Current U.S. immigration law has 3 goals: to reunify families, attract skilled workers, and offer asylum to refugees. In 1995, America will accept 675,000 legal immigrants, 70% of them people like Hai Peng, who've come to join their families. Since 1980, the U.S. has annually admitted roughly 50,000 people a year seeking asylum from political persecution. People like Andre and Elizabeth Boris. Andre was not always a cabinet maker. Back in Poland, both he and his wife Elizabeth were lawyers, but they found it difficult to practice law in a country without justice.
In 1983, a really hard time to live in Poland. Army had the power in the country. After 31 years, it was communist. I had enough. We had many problems with the police and other people, like a secret police. I mean, no future for my daughter. And finally, we made decisions that we wanted to leave the country, but it wasn't really easy to get a travel document because my wife had been a lawyer and she helped a lot the people from Solidarity.
I defend some people from Solidarity, and I don't know, I was scared.
Many people been in jail and many people been in a prison, but also many people have to go to the police and they ask you about everything, what are you doing, what your friends are doing, and this kind of stuff. So you can be really close to start work with them. It's what they want to do. So you can start to do investigation for them. You know, if you start to do it, you start to tell the police what other people are doing. You can get a travel document. You can get a better job. Even you can get the money from them. It's how they are talking to the people. Right? That's how the system works.
Sometimes I was terrified. And it's hard to work when nobody obeys a law.
So finally in 1983 we got travel documents and we left the country.
We got here opportunity to work, opportunity to start a new life. The same with we were thinking about Kathy, about our daughter. We were thinking about freedom, about new life without any fear, you know, that you can go anywhere you want to, right? Without asking anybody.
It's up to the person. And in America, you have all the opportunities and you have every chance to make for yourself the kind of life that you want to have. I think that's what it is.
Freedom.
That's what the American dream is for me, to have the freedom.
In the years before World War II, the American dream for most refugees was just that, a dream.
In 1938, when people really began to have an idea what Hitler was all about, in this country, only 4% of the people in a public opinion poll said that we should increase these very severe quotas in order to permit refugees to come to the United States to escape what many people knew would then be a horrible condition, if not death. In 1939, the numbers only went up to 8%, 8.7%, and by that time the war clouds were all over Europe and people were, and we turned back the ship. A refugee ship, the St. Louis. Here was Roosevelt trying to get the Europeans to accept refugees, and the United States, because of its great fear of domestic politics, turned back this refugee ship with people who were doomed. It turned out that many of them, of course, most of them, met a fate in concentration camps. Then came the war, and there was a great sea change in American attitudes following World War II. It was a war to preserve democracy and the 4 freedoms. It was a war in which all Americans were mobilized, in which we had a greater respect for the pluralism in our own country. And so we began to get little changes in our law to at least be more receptive to refugees, but no fundamental overhaul of immigration policy. We did take in about 600,000 to 700,000 persons who were displaced persons under a bill that President Truman sponsored in 1948.
In the 1950s, President Eisenhower signed emergency relief acts, admitting refugees from Hungary's anti-Soviet uprising and China's civil war.
The vanguard of an estimated 50,000 refugees from Castro's Cuba arrives in Florida.
In the early 60s, President Johnson welcomed Cubans.
I declare this afternoon to the people of Cuba that those who seek refuge here in America will find it. The dedication of America to our traditions as an asylum for the oppressed is going to be upheld.
The fall of Cambodia and South Vietnam unleashed a flood of refugees in the late 70s, and by 1990, some 586,000 people of Indochinese origin were living in the U.S. In 1980, a second wave of some 125,000 Cuban refugees, released by Castro through the port of Mariel, sought asylum in America, and President Carter admitted them. They were followed by more than 20,000 Haitians before President Reagan stemmed the tide of Haitian immigration by establishing a policy of detention.
The United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois is now in session. Be seated and come to order, please.
Andre and Elizabeth Boris know they're lucky. They got in. But most of the 16 million refugees huddled in camps around the world today, who still look longingly at the beacon of hope embodied in the Statue of Liberty lifting her lamp beside the Golden Door, know they will never get in. Primo and Maria Romelia Miramontes know they're lucky too. Although the Golden Door was not open for them, they slipped in the back way when no one was looking, and they were given the chance to stay.
I was in the school. I've been doing well, but my father passed away in 1974. No money coming, not the same money is coming in the house. So I just quit the school and I decided to come in this country. It was no problem getting to the border. To cross the border, I tried 7 times. And I just can't make it. There's the border, and there's the immigration right there. And they catch me and they send me back. But I try every 6-5 hours. And at 8 or 9 times, I make it. But I mean, I have to walk night, day, with no money to buy food. I was picking garbage to find food in there, you know. And it was hard.
In March of 1976, a cousin helped Primo get a job in Cicero. He met Maria Romelia, who was also here illegally, at a wedding. They married in 1980, had 3 children, and tried to become invisible.
Hi, Ma. I was afraid, you know, because immigration never catch me. But I just think they put handcuffs, and I told my mother, how come they put handcuffs? They're not a criminal. They don't kill no people. They only come to work in the United States, and we don't come to steal somebody else's things, you know, we only come to work.
You go to bed scared. You wake up scared because it's a long way to go if they take them back. You just go to work, come back to the house. On the weekend you go shopping, and that's it. You don't go have fun because there's no way to protect yourself from immigration.
Okay. Your oath ceremony, Thursday, November 17th. Bring this letter, your green card, and driver's license with you to the ceremony. Okay. This day they'll swear you in and you'll be a citizen. Okay. Congratulations.
Thank you.
In 1986, the Miramontes took advantage of the offer of amnesty, applied to become legal residents, and started preparing for naturalization.
I'm not afraid to take advantage of that because it was a big chance for us. Not for only Mexico.
For everybody, for all Mexicans.
So I feel good because I was waiting 12 years to go see my mom. And as soon as I get the card, I go see it. You know, and she told me when I get there, she said, well, I think you already forgot you got mother. I said, no. No, it's, the people come to the United States is because they don't have a work there. Not enough for living. You know? That's one of the reasons. You're looking for a better life. But if you want something, you gotta fight for it. Yeah, everybody have opportunity in here. If they want to be something, somebody, they can do it. We're happy to be a citizen because that's what we want. That's what we planning for a long time.
I told my husband we're gonna die here and we're gonna bury here, you know.
We're already by the land, cemetery. Yeah,
I told him we're not gonna go back to Mexico. My kids are in school here and.
It's people who came here illegally, like Primo and Maria, who cause the greatest concern in the debate over immigration.
There is reason to be concerned. It's estimated that there are over 3 million illegal aliens currently residing in the United States. This constitutes a significant part of the American labor force.
What's going on now is no different than what has happened at other times. It's unfortunate, but it's a very real tradition that this nation has to want to shut the door to the next wave of folks.
I think America better wake up because our borders are in danger, and we better define who is an American.
I don't think illegal immigrants are the problem. I think that when this country faces harsh economic times, illegal immigrants are the natural scapegoat to point to.
Illegal immigrants come from all parts of the world.
I can't think of a nationality that we don't encounter from time to time illegally here, working without authorization, or overstaying their visa provisions, or doing something in violation of law.
But the vast majority of illegal aliens living in the United States are Mexican nationals.
And their greatest impact has been felt in California.
Save our state. No funding illegals.
California confronted the problem last fall by passing Proposition 187, a law to deny health care and educational benefits to illegal immigrants and their children.
The question that every Californian has to ask between now and November the 8th is how many can you educate, how many can you incarcerate, how many can you medicate, and how many can you compensate?
I think what was going on was a cry for help. They were having a very significant regional impact in California, particularly Southern California. And Washington was yawning at their concerns.
The sense that illegal immigration is out of control has prompted several studies of immigration in general, but no clear picture of costs and benefits has emerged. One study by Rice University reported that in 1992, legal and illegal immigrants cost government $42 billion more in services than they paid in taxes. An opposing study by the Urban Institute found that immigrants paid in $27 billion more in taxes than they used in services.
So the overall consensus is that probably immigration as a whole has beneficial effects, but that low-skilled immigration has net negative effects, and illegal immigrants tend to be disproportionately low-skilled immigrants.
One reason there's no national consensus on the immigration issue is that its impact is not felt equally throughout the country.
In most of the states of the United States, there's very few illegal aliens. But in a few states, there are large numbers, and they do have a substantial impact on the labor market and on the overall economy of those states.
Immigration has not yet become a burning issue in Chicago for several reasons. The numbers of illegal immigrants are not as great as in Florida and the Southwest. Chicago has strong immigrant traditions and ethnic community supports.
Hola, ¿cómo está?
And the regional director of the Immigration and Naturalization Service in Chicago, A.D. Moyer, is an unusual man.
If there were not a need, they would not be here. They are satisfying a need in this country. They are fulfilling jobs that are open and vacant, and employers that are begging them to go to work.
Were it not for employers who are willing to violate the law because they see an advantage in hiring people who don't have the right to work in this country, there would probably be much less of a flow of immigrants coming here. If people knew that it was impossible for them to be employed in this nation, they would not come. I, for one, would not be entirely adverse to the idea of the U.S. committing its enforcement resources to punishing employers who hire people who are not authorized to work. I think that's a much better approach to doing away with the magnet that attracts people to this nation than to try to punish those folks who believe and have been told, and in fact have been welcomed at some points, that they can work. They can work. If people can work in this nation, then let that be the policy question.
The debate is also influenced by the way the media frame the issues.
If you look at the media, the images about immigration are for the most part horrible and scary to people. You have some militaristic type situation in the middle of the night of people trying to sneak into your country. You have situations like a whole bunch of Chinese immigrants that are being pulled out of a ship that are trying to invade the nation, where you have Middle Eastern terrorists being arrested at airports or being guilty of bombings in the World Trade Center and creating a threat of terrorism that this country feels has never had to deal with. So those are the images that I think tend to formulate the perspective that people have on immigration. But you'll find that if you ask your average Joe, Joe Public, for example, and you ask them in a way that personalizes the issue of immigration, you tell them, well, what do you think, if your job was being threatened, would you be in favor of less immigration? What kind of answer could you get to that? Yes. But then if you tell that person, well, but that could mean that your neighbor, Jose, whom you've known for 7 years, and the guy that you share your lawnmower with might be affected by that, then they will have a different response to a question about immigration policy because it personalizes it for them and it's not based on these very negative stereotypical images.
Proposition 187 showed how impassioned people feel when a defining issue like immigration imperils their sense of security and identity and quality of life.
People are fed up with prejudice and racial attitudes. It has nothing to do with being Latino or being brown or green or pink. It has everything to do with whether or not you're legally here.
Not so, say Mexican Americans, remembering the government's Operation Repatriation program, which deported workers with Hispanic names to open jobs for returning vets after World War II.
Thousands of people who were U.S. citizens, born in the United States in second and third generation, individuals were rounded up and sent back to a country they've never been to. See, if that's the precedent, that's a historical precedent that someone like me has to relate to and respond to. And that's why there's some anger in terms of how we respond to those kinds of perceptions or characterizations of the immigration question.
Send me your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. That's one of the most stirring and beautiful poems and ideas about America.
In addition to holding the torch of liberty in one hand, she holds the book of laws in the other.
If you're going to have liberty, it has to be an ordered liberty, or people get pushed around and you stir up discord.
Any study of immigration at some point becomes an exercise in ambivalence. To many, cracking down on immigrants, even illegal ones, feels like hacking at one's own roots.
All of us, except for American Indians, are one way or another immigrants. And all of us, if we trace our roots back far enough, we'll find somebody in our family like precisely those people who are now being condemned as illegal immigrants. That is, somebody who crossed a border, sometimes at great personal risk, for the purpose of making a better life for his or her family.
I know why my parents came here, to escape the tyranny of a dictatorship that was killing people only because of the way they worship their God. I can't blame people for wanting to come to this country. Don't think I would ever send anybody. I would have to disqualify myself, because if some decent person wanted to come to this country and they come in illegally, I would never send them back. And that is my personal philosophy, which I live by.
In the 4 decades between the Civil War and the turn of the century, 14 million new Americans passed through Ellis Island. Then the numbers jumped. More than 1 million people came in 1905, and that mark was surpassed 6 more times before 1914. When this great wave of Italians, Greeks, Turks, Russians, Slavs, and Jews arrived, new anxieties arose about making Americans of so many different kinds of foreigners.
And so the Immigration Restriction League was born in 1894, centered mainly in New England, led by New England intellectuals. And they developed racial theories about superior people and inferior people, and that was made into a theory of cultural superiority, who could adjust well and do well in the United States. So there was a great hue and outcry about numbers.
100 years ago, Chicago was America's fastest growing and most diverse city. Rebuilt from the ashes of the Great Chicago Fire in 1871, largely by immigrant labor, the city hosted a World's Fair in 1893 to mark 400 years since Columbus's first voyage to America. 26 million visitors found a city of stark contrasts, a city of poverty and promise, a city at the center of an intense and growing debate about the meaning and direction of America. Some things have not changed.
The parallels between the 1890s and the 1990s are kind of interesting because one of the great depressions of this country hit in 1890s, began in 1893, 94. And so you had economic stress combined with large-scale immigration that was coming from new sources to produce a kind of hysteria against immigrants. And it's not unlike what we are experiencing now, a kind of hysteria against immigrants.
But some things may have changed in the past century, raising questions as to whether immigration is still a heritage to defend or a habit it may be time to overcome.
In the late 19th century, when the Statue of Liberty was put up and when Emma Lazarus was doing her poetry, the American economy was very different than the economy of today. At that time, there seemed to be an unlimited demand for low-skilled labor, unskilled labor, working in the mines, working on the farms, and working in the factories. Large numbers of immigrants without skills could be absorbed into the American economy. And also there was a different attitude then. If somebody couldn't make it economically, tough luck. It was that person's problem. If the person was lucky enough to find some organization or individual who will give charity, okay. But it was not a public concern. The world of the late 20th century is very different in both of those dimensions. One is that the economy has changed. The labor market opportunities for workers with limited skills are just not there anymore. And the other change is that we now have public concerns about income distribution issues, which we didn't have 100 years ago. The government is very heavily involved in trying to raise up the income levels of those who are at the bottom of the income distribution. Low-skilled immigration makes that much harder.
There's nothing new about the fear of low-skilled workers. Labor leader Samuel Gompers, a Dutch-born Jew who himself immigrated from England in 1863, complained that the immigrants who came at the turn of the century provided cheap and ignorant labor that takes our jobs and cuts our wages. Slowly, immigration curbs were imposed. In 1906, Congress created a single immigration agency and made a knowledge of English a requirement for naturalization. President Theodore Roosevelt established a commission to study the problem. The commission issued a report in 1910 which stated that inherent racial tendencies, rather than poverty, explained miserable immigrant living conditions. No action was taken, but racist feeling was on the rise. During World War I, Mexican and black families migrated to northern cities to work in the war industries and met increasing resistance there. The Ku Klux Klan was revived at this time, with passions inflamed by a Red Scare and a hysterical drive for 100% Americanism. The Klan launched a wave of repression, accompanied by whippings, shootings, and lynchings. their victims usually being blacks, Jews, Catholics, Mexicans, and other immigrants. Race riots erupted in Chicago in July 1919, when high-wage black workers tried to move from the overcrowded housing of the city's Black Belt into all-white neighborhoods. Police and troops removed some threatened families to safety. Others were less fortunate. A photographer captured the sequence of a man being chased and stoned to death with bricks by a riotous mob. Both blacks and whites were killed. The rioting ended only after police and troops helped blacks move out and restored order. More than 120,000 Southern blacks migrated north to Chicago for economic opportunities in the 1920s, at which time nearly 70% of Chicago's population of 2 million was foreign-born or the children of foreign-born. Some of the African Americans who migrated north at this time had roots in America dating back 15 generations, to the nation's earliest days.
In 1860, if the slave wasn't physically there, he didn't get counted. Okay? At this point, J.C. Wade is no interest to me. I'm interested in M.B. Wade, H.C., and R.W. Wade.
Raleigh Floyd is showing members of Chicago's Afro-American Genealogical and Historical Society how he compared census records and slave schedules to trace his own roots and come a little closer to understanding what it means to be an American.
You have to not only research the genealogy of the slave, but you have to research the genealogy of the slave owner, because slaves were property, and you have to trace the owner and what he did with his property. I just left a conference in Richmond, Virginia a couple weeks ago, and one of the most fascinating sessions that I went to was on indentured servants that came over to this country from Scotland. And it was really fascinating because many of them were treated very similar to what African slaves were treated. But the difference was that when they came in as indentured servants, they had a term, and when that term was up, then they could assimilate into society, where slaves were slaves for life. Plus, we had a color badge on us, which we could not escape.
But they're embarrassed to say it to anyone because everyone says, oh, you know, we all came over on slave ships. But my research has shown a large number of Africans who immigrated to this country, just like Europeans did, paid their way on a ship and came here and set up a business.
In genealogy, one of the things that you do is you start to read primary documents and original records to see what really went on.
This has led to a number of discoveries about the large number of free blacks living in the South before the Civil War, for instance.
There were hundreds of thousands free in the South as well as the North. We always think about free African Americans above the Mason-Dixon line, but particularly Virginia and Maryland had huge numbers of free African Americans.
There have been discoveries about black slave owners.
Particularly in South Carolina, also in Louisiana and other places, there were blacks that did own slaves. One of the reasons that many of them owned slaves was because of the fact that they were a prior slave and they were freed, but their relatives and their family were still slaves. So many times they did own them so they can keep the family units together. But then it was the fact that that was how the society existed. If you were a farmer, you needed people to work your land. So you had to have slaves to work that land because, as we know it now, hiring people and paying them wages as farmers really didn't exist for the majority part. This country was built upon slave labor. So if you were free and you had a farm, then you had slaves to work that.
And the research led to discoveries about diversity and the need for American history to both accurately reflect and respect it.
In reality, I think we are really the most mixed up people that they are, because not only are we from Africa, but our ancestors are from Ireland, from England, from France, we're all over. Yet we are considered as being non-white. You're putting us in one category. We really should be able to say we're Irish, or because we have Irish blood, or we're French because we have French blood, or whatever. So as far as immigration is concerned, some of our relatives have come from all over.
This has always been a diverse country. if you look at the original documents of Jamestown and Williamsburg, you will find that was a very culturally diverse community. There were black artisans, black business people, free blacks. I'm not talking about slaves. From the very earliest time of this republic. And in fact, sometimes it's difficult to know which citizens were black and which were white, because nobody cared in the early days of this society. Now, the people who have written the history books have omitted all of that. And that's one thing that we're finding as African American genealogists, is that we have to rewrite the history of this country.
We played much more of a larger role in this country than people ever gave us credit for. So I think that as we're redefining America in terms of immigration policy, what we'll find out is that many people that came into this country played a very large role, and everyone needs to be given credit for that role. And we really need to know what really existed, not just what's in, a textbook that may be incorrect.
While the migration of blacks and the images of the Roaring Twenties may suggest a wide-open society, the fear of the changing face of America led in 1924 to the passage of landmark legislation ending centuries of open admission. The law, called the Johnson-Reed Act, became the cornerstone of America's immigration policy for 41 years, establishing racial and ethnic quotas based on the 1890 census, thus favoring white Protestant immigrants from the north and west of Europe. When the first shares were announced, half of all places were reserved for British residents, whereas only 5,800 Italians, 6,500 Poles, and 2,700 Russians could be admitted, and Asians were excluded altogether. The Johnson-Reed Act began to be outdated immediately. One of its objectives, cutting down on immigration overall, was advanced by the Great Depression. Only 34,000 immigrants arrived to take their chances in a shuttered economy, with totals holding low the next 7 years. But Hitler and communist dictators gave new meaning to the word refugee, and millions of victims of history would come knocking at the door. In 1952, during the height of McCarthyism, the Cold Warriors in Congress passed the McCarran-Walter Act, maintaining the restrictions of the national origins quota. President Harry Truman issued a blistering veto message on the law.
That law places a stigma of unworthiness on people from the countries of Eastern and Southern Europe. It holds them to be less desirable than the Northern Europeans. The discrimination in our immigration laws is an insult to these people and an injury to the free world.
Truman created a commission whose report laid the groundwork for a new immigration policy opposed to the national origins quota system. And in 1965, in the midst of the civil rights movement, President Johnson made that policy law.
This bill says simply that from this day forth, those wishing to immigrate to America shall be admitted on the basis of their skills and their close relationships to those already here. The fairness of this standard is so self-evident that we may well wonder that it has not always been applied. The days of unlimited immigration are past, but those who do come will come because of what they are and not because of the land from which they sprung.
Jasmina Shihan, Parimala Murali Chadi, Hector Anthony Fernando.
Just listen to the names and look at the faces in any present-day naturalization ceremony, and you'll see the impact the 1965 law had on American immigration. In the 1960s, 3.3 million immigrants arrived in America, 33% of them of European origin. In the 1970s, 4.5 million immigrants arrived, 18% of them Europeans. By the decade of the 80s, when 7.4 million immigrants came, Europeans accounted for only 10%. In 1986, Congress passed the Federal Immigration Reform and Control Act, which provided amnesty and eventual citizenship to 2.5 million illegal aliens then in the United States. And it set penalties against employers who hired illegals, but easy access to fake citizenship papers took the bite out of sanctions, and the number of illegals continued to rise. The last major revision to the federal immigration law in 1990 raised the federal immigration ceiling to $675,000 a year beginning in 1995. And at the same time, it raised calls for further immigration reform.
America is going through one of those periodic episodes of trying to redefine what it means to be an American. We do this every 30, 40, or 50 years, and it usually coincides with a period of tension, economic tension or social tension.
Some anti-immigrant feelings are based on the fear that uncontrolled immigration will change not just the face of America, but the American way of life, turning this country itself into a third world nation.
If U.S. immigration policy continues the way it has been for the last number of years, there'll be an increasing gap between those who have and those who don't have. I also see divisiveness cutting across geography, where Southern California, Texas, Florida, New York, maybe in not too many years Illinois, will feel very strongly about restricting immigration, and the rest of the country will not view it as such an intense political concern.
Somebody from a peasant agrarian background with no money, almost no education, illiterate even in his native language. All of those characteristics that we would now describe as characteristic of the third world were true of my grandfather. But, you know, my view of it is no Grandpa Greenberg, no Doug Greenberg. And that's the promise that America offers. It's not a promise only to the generation that immigrates. It's a promise to all the generations that follow the immigrant.
Each new immigrant is changed by America, and in the process, changes it. The unsettled question of American history is whether we human beings are wise enough, not just to govern ourselves, but to see ourselves in each other.
Mother would say, if somebody would come in and say she had ran a little penny candy store in what was called Jewtown, the Maxwell Street area, if somebody would come in and say something nice about somebody's color or their race or religion, my good ma would say in broken English and Yiddish, my children don't hear that, and you can't talk like there and chase them out of there. So I'm hopeful that you'll bring to this country the things that I learned from my parents, kindness and lack of prejudice against anybody.
I have a motion to present before this honorable court. This morning, the 1,000 applicants who are duly assembled here have presented their applications for naturalization to the Attorney General. I therefore respectfully move, Your Honor, that you admit them to citizenship upon their taking of the oath of allegiance as prescribed by law.
Raise your right hands and repeat after me loud and clear. I, and state your names now, do hereby declare on oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince.
What it seems to me is most attractive about the United States is not simply our economic prosperity, other countries have that, but our guarantees with respect to what citizens get, citizenship. And that's a very, very powerful thing to carry with you wherever you go. And it's valuable not only because we're the richest country in the world, but also because we have certain kinds of constitutional guarantees that other countries do not.
And that I take this oath, an obligation, freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, so help me God. Now that's all, folks. Let's give this new citizens a nice warm reception and shake hands with your neighbor now and congratulate each other.
For Purple Mountain mountains' majesties, above the fruited plains. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Thank you.
Discover music and dance from around the world with the Trinity Dance Company, the Maxwell Street Klezmer Band, Natia Kalalayam Dance Company, Paulinho Garcia's Jazz Minero, and La Belle Africaine, here on World Stage Chicago. And now from National Public Radio's weekly program, Afro Pop Worldwide, your host, Georges Collinet.
Bienvenidos, vitam punyeng alhan wassalam. Bienvenue, welcome. Join me for the next hour on a tour of the world from the city of Chicago. You'll meet musicians and dancers from 5 continents, all dedicated to preserving and sharing their traditions. Every city and small town in America was built by people who came from countries around the globe. Each day, new immigrants arrive, bringing with them hopes and dreams and their rich cultures. Their songs and dances tell the stories from country to country. Many of the themes are similar: work, the land, family, and love. But through these art forms, we also discover what's unique about the cultures that make up America. We'll begin our journey with the Europeans. The Irish were among the first to arrive in America, fleeing the potato famine of the 1840s and the oppression of their English rulers. Our first group is the Trinity Dance Company musicians. You'll meet the dancers in just a few moments. This song is a reel from the southeast of Ireland. It's played on traditional instruments, including the uilleann pipes, a cross between the bagpipe and the church organ. This is called the Dunmore Lasses. Please welcome the world champion Trinity Dance Company, performing a set of Irish reels.
This song is a recent addition to the Celtic tradition. It's called the Queen of Argyll.
Gentlemen, it is my duty to inform you of one beauty, though I'll ask for you a favour now, to see her in a while. I own she is a creature of character and feature, and no words can paint a picture. I'm the queen of all Argyll, and if you could have seen her there, boys, if you had just been there, the swan was in her movement, and the morning in her smile. All the roses in the garden, they bowed to ask a pardon, for not one can match the beauty of the queen of all Argyll. On this evening that I mention, I passed with light intention to a part of our dear country known for beauty and for style. in that place of noble thinkers, great scholars and great drinkers, but above them all for splendor shone the Queen of all Argyle. And if you could have seen her there, boys, if you had just been there, the swan was in her movement and the morning in her smile. All the roses in the garden, they'd bow to ask a pardon, for not one can match the beauty of the Queen of all Argyle. So me lads, I need mislead ye, my intentions nae to grieve ye, nor will I deceive ye, for I'll see her in a while. I must find some way to gain her, to court her and to retain her, for I fear me heart's in danger from the Queen of all Argyle. And if you could have seen her there, boys, if you had just been there, the swan was in her movement and the morning in her smile. All the roses in the garden, they'd bow to ask a pardon, for not one did match the beauty of the Queen of all Argyle. And if you could have seen her there, boys, if you had just been there, the swan was in her movements and the morning in her smile. All the roses in the garden, they'd bow to ask a pardon, for not one did match the beauty of the Queen of all Argyle.
Did you know that by 1890 there were more Germans in Chicago than any German city except Hamburg and Berlin? Well, it's true. The Irish, Germans, Poles, and Scandinavians were the largest groups in Chicago at the turn of the century, but many others were growing fast. Bohemians, Hungarians, Greeks, and Italians moved in and created their own dynamic communities. Italian culture is still vibrant in pockets around Chicago because of people such as Pompeo Stillo. He's a musician, he hosts an Italian radio show, and he owns a store called Italian Records.
My name is Pompeo Stillo. I came to this country in 1962. Now I own this small Italian business. It's 100% Italian because I sell Italian music, Italian records, Italian video, Italian cards, Italian perfumes, Italian magazines, and anything in the educational field we can say. The music in Italy, everybody knows already that in opera, you know, we have a great music, great composers, Verdi, Puccini, Donizetti, Cilea, and many others, Mascagni. And in folk music, we have a lot of composers too. They are not well known, but they are great too, still today. Here in America, the most popular songs are the Neapolitan songs, because you see, from Caruso and on, everybody used to sing these very famous, beautiful songs. Most people, they don't even know that Italy has 20 regions. Each region, they have different type of life, different type of folk life, we can say. The music is different. The folk music from south, they have an influence from the Mediterranean Sea. But the music from the north part, they have more influence from the European, you know, like German, Polish, and this and that. The folk music is very important too in the life of the Italian regions, especially for the religious feast, for marriage, for weddings, and even funerals. But it's logical that the important part are the most beautiful songs are dedicated to love. Don't matter where you go, the folk music is very important even today. It's the life of the country, it's the life of the region, the life of the town. I think all over the world, in different countries, is the same.
Now please welcome the Maxwell Street Klezmer Band.
Hi, I'm Lori Lippitz. A klezmer is a Jewish folk musician from Eastern Europe. On Sunday mornings on Maxwell Street in Chicago at the turn of the century, Jewish peddlers sold their wares from pushcarts and open stalls. Although life was hard, when it was time to celebrate a chasana, a wedding, the entire community would turn out to congratulate the bride and groom, to dance and to say, "Congratulations, Mazel Tov."
Mazel Tov! Mazel Tov, Kinderla! Congratulations!
Our next song is called Hasidic in America. It blends the jazzy sounds of early American vaudeville, 1920s style, with the Jewish nigun, a wordless melody, a sort of a prayer without words. And this is a cross between religious chant and scat singing.
doodle-dum, levitic, levitic, I lay yum, doodle-dum, levitic, I play a little die. Levitic, I lay. Levitic, I play a little die. Yada-die-dum, yada-die-dum, yada-die, ay-ay-ay. Yada-die-dum, yada-die-dum, yada-die, ay-ay-ay. Yada-die-dum, yada-die-dum, yada-die, ay-ay-ay. Yada-die-dum, yada-die-dum, yada-die, ay-ay-ay. Yum-a-doodle-dum, levitic, I lay. Yum-a-doodle-dum, levitic, I play a little die. Levitic, I lay. Levitic, I play a little die. Oh, yabba-little-doodle-dum, afraid, yabba-little-doodle-dum, afraid, yabba-bum, stabba-bum, yabba-bum, yabba-little-doodle-dum, afraid, yabba-little-doodle-dum, afraid, yabba-bum, stabba-bum, yabba-bum. Bum bum ba-da-dum, ay-ya-da-dee-dum, ay-ay-ay-ay, stabba-bum, yum, bum ba-da-dum, ay-ya-da-dee-dum, ay-ay-ay-ay, stabba-bum, bim bum bum, yum, bum ba-da-dum, ay-ya-da-dee-dum, ay-ay-ay-ay, stabba-bum, yum, bum ba-da-dum, ay-ya-da-dee-dum, ay-ay-ay-ay.
Let's move further east now to Asia. Although there were small Chinese and Japanese communities in Chicago in the late 1800s, Asian immigrants were excluded for many years by laws that discriminated against non-Europeans. It wasn't until 1965 that the US enacted a new law lifting restrictions and welcoming people from throughout Asia. Thousands of new immigrants arrived and transformed older European neighborhoods into bustling new communities. The children of these immigrants grew up immersed in American pop culture, but many Asian Americans want their children to learn the traditional songs and dances too. So let's meet a woman who devotes many hours to this labor of love.
I'm proud to be a Filipino, although I'm an American citizen now. My name is Anita Rosa. I'm the director and also part choreographer of the Philippine Performing Arts of Chicago Youth Group. I think it's very important for the Philippine youth, especially those who were born and grew up in the United States, to learn the folk dance so that they have a sense of belonging. I try to teach them the authentic steps so that it can be preserved and not changed at all. The tinikling is perhaps one of the most exciting of all Philippine dances. The tinikling got its name from the long-legged rice bird. These birds are like pests, and they go into the rice fields. So the farmers try to put some kind of bamboo trap, and it snaps if the tickling bird would step on it. So the dancers are trying to imitate a tickling, not to be able to be caught between the bamboo poles that are being clapped. Filipinos are very musical people. They use music as an expression of their sentiments, of their feelings. They use music also and dances to express their emotions.
Our next group specializes in classical Indian dance, which uses hand gestures and facial expressions to tell a story. The moods and emotions are also reinforced in the music. They'll perform a dance about Indian immigrants who try to blend into their new surroundings without losing their identities. They are strengthened by the belief that all beings have the same spirit connecting them. So please welcome to World Stage Chicago, the Natya Kalalayan Dance Company, performing The Oneness of Life.
Maga mani papa maga samaga ma pa ma pa ni pa ga ma pa sa ni pa maga mani papa maga samaga ma pa ni pa ga ma pa sa ni pa maga mani papa maga samaga ma pa ni pa ga ma pa sa ni pa maga mani papa maga samaga ma pa ni pa ga ma pa sa ni sari ga pa da sa ni da pa ma ga ri sari ga da pa ma ga ri ga pa da ri sa ni da sa ri ga pa ma ga ri sa ni da ga ri ga sa ni da pa ma ga ri sa ni da ri sa ri pa ma ga da pa da sa ni da ri sa ri pa ma ga ri sa ni pa da sa ni ga ri sa ni da pa ma ga ri sa ni da ga ri sa ni da pa ma ga ri sa ni da ga ri sa ni da pa ma ga ri sa ni sa ri ga ri sa ni da ni ga ni sa ni da pa ma da pa ma ga ri sa sari ga ri ga ma pa da ga ri sa ni da ri sa ga ri sa ni da ni ga ri sa ni da ri sa ni da pa sa ni da pa ma pa ga ri sa ni da ri sa ni da pa sa ni da pa da ri sa ni da pa sa ni da pa da ga ri sa ni da ri sa ni da pa sa ni da pa ma pa ga ri sa ni da ri sa ni da pa sa ni da pa ma sa ri ga ma pa ri ga ma pa da pa ga ri sa ni da pa sa ni da pa da ni ga ri sa ni da ri sa ni da pa sa ni da pa ma Dim nadre kita tom tare kita tom ta tam kitam dai tade kita takadim takuni kutakadim nadre kita tom tare kita tom ta tam kitam dai tade kita takadim takuni kutakadim tade kita tom tam ta kita tom ta tam kitam dai tade kita takadim takuni kutakadim nadre kita tom tam ta kita tom ta tam kitam dai tade kita takatari tari takadim janana 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 dim takuni kutakadim tade tade dirana tade kita tari tari tade tade dirana tade tade dirana tade kita tari tari tade tade dirana tari tam tadana dirana tadana dirana tari tam tadana dirana takita tam 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 takita tam 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 takita tam 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 dim 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 tari alari tam 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 takatari alari dim 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 takare ko tari alari dim takuni kutakadim
Latin music and dance is strongly influenced by the Europeans and Africans who emigrated to Latin America and the Caribbean islands. The rhythms and instruments vary from country to country, depending upon which influences were strongest. Samba, cumbia, merengue, cha-cha-cha. Colorful rhythms have infused American music and dance since the early part of the century. So let's continue our journey through Latin America with two Chicagoans from different countries who share the same goal, celebrating their unique musical traditions.
Mexico has a very wide variety of musics. More styles of music than we play, more styles of music than most people have heard. My name is Juan Diaz. I work for the Old Town School of Folk Music. I'm a member of the group Sones de Mexico Ensemble. When people think of Mexican music, they will think mostly of mariachi music. But mariachi music belongs to a long tradition of different regional styles. You could say that Sones de Mexico plays the folk roots of mariachi music. The style is called son. Son is a tradition of music that is dance. It's danceable music. Its origins are rooted in indigenous music from Mexico. It is rooted in Spanish music brought by the conquistadors, and it's rooted in African music. The piece that we performed is called Jarabe Nayarita. The Jarabe Nayarita is played in an area where farmers use the machete to harvest their crops. And it is not surprising to me that they would use these tools that they use in their daily lives and incorporate them into their dance and show off their skill in handling this tool. The feet are an instrument, and in this case the machete was also an instrument. He was playing the machete to the rhythm, and he was tapping rhythms that are a percussion part of the ensemble. By performing the music that we perform, which is not heard very often here, we try to show a different side of Mexican music.
My name is Rubén D'Artagnan González, and I am co-concertmaster of the Chicago Symphony. I came to this country many years ago. I am originally from Argentina. I don't miss any other place in the world except the music of my own country.
Con este tango que es burlón y compadrito, sea todos alas la ilusión de mi suburbio.
The tango is really the soul of the music in Argentina, although it is the music of one region, and particularly one city, the city of Buenos Aires. It originated through the input and the contributions of a number of different currents of Europeans that immigrated to Argentina. It started in bordellos and in low-life atmosphere for people who had very little else to make a living and started expressing their frustration, a lot like jazz and blues did for the soul of American music.
Tango querido.
It's a mini opera in a way. There's all that passion, there's all that similarity with the stories told in opera.
Hoy que no tengo.
There's blood and fire and frustration and hate and love. All of that is very strong.
Cuando tu canto se oye el son de un bandoneón.
In this music, I find such affinity and such ease of connection with it that I think I can share that successfully with many people, and it gives me great pleasure.
Please welcome from all over Latin America, Paulinho Garcia's Jasmineiro.
Cuiga roncou de fome, alguém mandou parar a cuiga, é coisa dos homens. Roncou de raiva, cuiga roncou de fome, alguém mandou parar a cuiga, é coisa dos homens. A raiva dá pra parar, pra interromper, a fome não dá pra interromper, a raiva e a fome é coisa dos homens. A fome tem que ter raiva pra interromper, a raiva e a fome de interromper, a raiva e a fome é coisa dos homens. É coisa dos homens, é coisa dos homens, a raiva e a fome mexeu na cuica, vai ter que roncar, roncou, roncou. Roncou de raiva, cuiga, roncou de fome, alguém mandou parar a cuiga, é coisa dos homens. Roncou, roncou, roncou de raiva, cuiga, roncou de fome, alguém mandou parar a cuiga, é coisa dos homens. A raiva dá pra parar, pra interromper, a fome não dá pra interromper, a raiva e a fome é coisa dos homens. A fome tem que ter raiva pra interromper, a raiva e a fome de interromper, a raiva e a fome é coisa dos homens. É coisa dos homens, é coisa dos homens, a raiva e a fome mexeu na cuica, vai ter que roncar, roncou, roncou. Roncou de raiva, cuiga, roncou de fome, alguém mandou parar a cuiga, é coisa dos homens. Roncou, roncou, roncou de raiva, cuiga, roncou de fome, alguém mandou parar a cuiga, é coisa dos homens. Roncou, roncou, roncou de raiva, cuiga, roncou de fome, alguém mandou parar a cuiga, é coisa dos homens. Roncou, roncou, roncou de raiva, cuiga, roncou de fome, alguém mandou parar a cuiga, é coisa dos homens. Roncou, roncou, roncou de raiva, cuiga, roncou de fome, alguém mandou parar a cuiga, é coisa dos homens. Roncou, roncou, roncou de raiva, cuiga, roncou de fome, alguém mandou parar a cuiga, é coisa dos homens. Roncou.
I have so many brothers that I can't even count, and a sister, very beautiful, that we named Libertad, freedom. These are the last lines of Los Hermanos, which means my brothers in Spanish. It's a song about the unity of all Spanish-speaking peoples throughout the world.
Yo tengo tantos hermanos que no los puedo contar. En el caño, en la montaña, en la pampa y en el mar. Cada cual con sus trabajos, con sus sueños, cada cual con la esperanza delante, con los recuerdos atrás. Yo tengo tantos hermanos que no los puedo contar. Gente de mano caliente, por eso de la amistad, con un lloro para llorarlo, con un rezo para rezar, con un horizonte abierto que siempre está más allá, y esa fuerza para buscarlo con tesón y voluntad. Cuando parece más cerca es cuando se aleja más. Yo tengo tantos hermanos que no los puedo contar. Y así seguimos andando, curtidos de soledad. Nos perdemos por el mundo, nos volvemos a encontrar. Y así nos reconocemos por el lejano mirar, por las coplas que mordemos, semillas de inmensidad. Y así seguimos andando, curtidos de soledad. Y en nosotros nuestros muertos, pa' que nadie quede atrás. Yo tengo tantos hermanos que no los puedo contar. Y una hermana muy hermosa que se llama libertad. Our next stop will take us to Dominican Republic and the rhythm of merengue. And we choose the song named Oye, that's a celebration of life. Abre tus ojos, mira hacia arriba, disfruta las cosas buenas que tiene la vida. Abre tus ojos, mira hacia arriba, disfruta las cosas buenas que tiene la vida. Un descanso en el camino, una botella de vino, una una mirada, una alegre carcajada, una cara en el espejo, un amigo, un buen consejo, un viaje, un barco velero, aunque no llegue primero, un caballito cerrero que no cura por dinero, un palmar, un riachuelo, un pedacito de cielo. Mira bien alrededor y verás las cosas bellas, que la vida es un amor, olvídate de tus penas. Oye, alza tus ojos, mira hacia arriba, disfruta las cosas buenas que tiene la vida. Abre tus ojos, mira hacia arriba, disfruta las cosas buenas que tiene la vida. La 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 la. Abre tus ojos, mira hacia arriba, disfruta las cosas buenas que tiene la vida. Abre tus ojos, mira hacia arriba, disfruta las cosas buenas que tiene la vida. Una playa, un cumpleaños, un buen recuerdo de antaños, un olor a hierba buena, una conversación amena, un romance que ha nacido, que te roba los sentidos, un parque lleno de niños, un bellísimo cariño, una lágrima, un momento, que sea todo sentimiento, una música muy bella, un perfume, una estrella. Mira bien alrededor y verás las cosas buenas, que la vida es un amor, olvídate de tus penas. Oye, abre tus ojos, mira hacia arriba, disfruta las cosas buenas que tiene la vida. Abre tus ojos, mira hacia arriba, disfruta las cosas buenas que tiene la 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 la.
Africans are some of the oldest immigrants in America, and they've had a huge influence on American music. The blues, gospel, jazz, R&B, and rock and roll all have their roots in African culture. But Africans are also some of the newest immigrants, bringing with them the traditional soul of Africa. They've inspired many young Americans to explore the songs and dances of the old continent. Les Ballets Africains du Sénégal is a music and dance ensemble from West Africa. The next piece features the drums and kora. The kora is a 21-string harp lute played by the griots, the storytellers for the emperors of the Mandingo diaspora. Our next song, Wttw Sénégal, echoes the pride and happiness the Senegalese feel about their homeland.
Sénégal, Wttw, Wttw, Sénégal,
Our world tour is about to end, but not before a grand finale that celebrates the diversity of our cultures and sets the stage for the future. It's a future in which we appreciate the beauty and richness of our many similarities and differences. A future when we can all dance and make music together. Please welcome back to the stage Les Belles Africains, Natia Kalalayam, the Trinity Dancers, and musicians from all of our bands. Thank you for joining us on World Stage Chicago. I'm Georges Collinet. Bonsoir, good night, buonasera, and peace.